right, well, we'll get this kicked off a little early because I'd love to start with some intros. Welcome, everybody. Today's panel, we're going to focus on the role of open source and cloud native in generative AI. My name is Taylor Dolezal, and I'm head of ecosystem at the CNCF. I get to work really closely with end users, folks like Intuit, Mercedes-Benz, and others that take these CNCF projects, work within the ecosystem, and use them to power their businesses. Not focusing on reselling them, but making them core pillars within their corporations and organizations. With that, I'd love to turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves. Really excited to get started. I've got some tough questions today, so it's going to get spicy. It's going to get good.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, panel. And everyone, my name is José Rodriguez. I'm originally from Colombia, South America, and I represent a company called Cuemby. We do cloud infrastructure, but we have some interesting things coming here in KubeCon. We're now going to unleash DevOps superpowers for people. But basically, to put it in a very small background, I started to learn about ecosystems with Indian tribes, and then I connect them to technology. And that's how we made it possible into Latin America, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, good morning. My name is Arun Gupta. I am the VP for open ecosystem team at Intel. So I'm responsible for the open source strategy across all of Intel, work with a lot of business units over there. I've been with CNCF for about 7 years, all along on the governing board, and I'm also the current governing board chair as well. So I do a lot of chop wood, carry water work around CNCF.
Hi everyone, I'm Annie. Nice to see you and meet you all here. So I'm CMO at Vision, which is a Swiss DevOps company, but I'm also a CNCF ambassador as well as an Azure MVP, which both of those essentially mean that I just love cloud native technologies and I love speaking about them to people. So I travel around a lot of conferences and whatnot, speaking about these topics there. I'm very excited for our panel today here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Augustus, head of open source at Cisco. So like Arun, I also handle open source strategy for my company. Spent a lot of time in the CNCF ecosystem, probably similar amount of time to Arun. Outside of being in and around Kubernetes for the last few years, I've also been working on OpenSSF, so securing the internet, yay. And I'm sure that'll come up in the panel.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Let's dive right in, shall we? The first section that I have some questions are about generative AI policies within organizations and basically setting yourselves up for success as you get started with GenAI, data privacy, security, those kinds of concerns. How are you structuring your policies to govern generative AI development and usage within your organization?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So in addition to all the things that I said, I'm also one of the co-owners of the Generative AI policy for Cisco. And that journey started because the Open Source Program Office, or OSPO, released a position statement regarding GitHub Copilot because everyone was like, yeah, let's use Copilot. And we're like, hang on. So yeah, I think it starts with interest, right, and the recognition that this is unstoppable, right? There is when I'm chatting with people, I think there's a lot of stuff that's done during the research phase of just like we're going to bring a new technology to market. There's some squishy stuff in the middle, and then at the end, like a product comes out or multiple products come out, right? So like with generative AI, we've compressed the timeline for that squishy stuff that involves like hardening a product, involves like thinking about all of the ethics around building something, and it's just appeared in front of the public, right? So I think the genesis of our policy was this is unstoppable, right? And we need to build for a situation where this exists at Cisco, right? It's not we're going to stop generative AI from happening. It's how do we work with it? How do we integrate it into our systems? So that's the start. I have more to say, but I'm going to kick it over.
Yeah, I think for every organization, it depends on the organization that you have and what kind of needs do you have. So I work for a company that's 50 people, so our needs are very different, or at least somewhat different than, for example, Cisco's needs, because we have maybe a bit of an, 50 people we can actually see and know and everyone in very different way than for a large enterprise. Now, for our company, the way that we basis all of our policies is usually, well, we always keep obviously security in mind, and we always prefer open source products and policies that are friendly towards these. So we base a lot of our decisions around generative AI on these as well. So we would like to kind of use these as well, because to be honest, as you said as well, usage of the software, usage of these things will happen no matter what you do. So it's more about controlling the discourse and making sure that everyone uses them in the way that benefits the company, both in productivity, but as well as from copyright, from legal, and all of these points of view. So it depends on the organization size, and I think for us, we are quite freeform with it, because we are a very open company as well. We have actually a full our company is built around open source policies, to the extent that all of our internal policies are available in a handbook that is published to the internet. So we are quite free in our way of thinking about this, but it depends on how you want to structure a business, on how you should do it.
The way we look at it is there have been multiple tipping points in the industry, like introduction of PC was one, then introduction of internet was another one, which fundamentally changed on how we do computing and how do we consume and produce information. Cell phone was a third wave, so to say. And in that sense, this is sort of the unstoppable fourth wave, where things are happening so rapidly, evolving so rapidly. So I hate to agree with everybody, but that's what the reality is, that there is no stopping GenAI. But the key to look at it is, how are you looking at GenAI probably for automating the boring tasks, where you can actually do the fun things, the fun elements out of it. So I think that's sort of the key element that we are looking at. Like, how can I automate, generating config files, or maybe churning out blogs faster, or maybe creating more creative videos. So that sort of element is what we are looking at it. And OSPO is part of my team, and so we are constantly working. There is a GenAI working group in our company as well that is constantly looking at it. And I think literally 4 days ago, I think LF came out with their policy on what does it mean to use GenAI in open source. And I think that's really a good one that hopefully a lot of people will adopt. So there is it's very, very early in the cycle. And I think this is gonna continue to evolve. I think it's anybody's guess where we're gonna be in a year from now, really.
Yeah, no one knows, but mostly in a way it's very easy, the easy tasks. In Latin America, we have a very strong theme about security and topics, and we tend to work very strongly with communities. That's why we do like a different approach, community as a service, and try to interact with them and make a benchmarking in order to have a better understanding of what's going on and what's wrong with a lot of things. But basically, and the most important thing is that we don't know where it's going. We have to take care a lot about security and, of course, introduce and interact with a lot of purposes. Diversity, it's quite important, especially for our region. And that's why there's an interesting thing in Latin America that we created an entire networking of Iberoamerica, it's called, Latin Index, that you can look in the website. And you have a lot of information, and there are a lot of big companies, and it's dedicated to implement faster open source and cloud native technologies. Hopefully in 2027, we will be having 90% of companies with cloud native technologies. Now we have 90% of open source, so hope we can, as region, interact and get into the same pace.
So I'm going to jump in and do the spooky scary. When you're building one of these policies, you should be really considering deeply all of the bad things that can happen with generative AI. I mean, with AI in general, right? So one of the things that came up and I brought to our P&C group, which is our people and communities or HR group, right, was, does this now mean that managers are maybe empowered to use generative AI to make hiring decisions or to make performance decisions
Or read a performance review.
yeah, or as a software engineer, knowing the competency track, knowing the various grade levels, et cetera, does that mean I can test above my grade level, right? So what does that mean in terms of the performance ladder, right? So so that's just the HR side, but a lot of the policy is geared towards like code generation and the scary things that can happen there. But there is what else is bad? Like what else can be bad? So if you're not thinking about responsible and trustworthy AI in addition to like let's do generative AI, right? You're going to a bad place. So.
I think just adding to that part, I think things are happening so rapidly. 4 or 5 days ago, U.S. government created this U.S. AI SI, which is United States AI Safety Institute. This is done in association with NIST. And so they are exactly looking at those elements of ethical and responsibility elements of it, that how these large companies, how are they creating these large foundation models? What is the test data? What is the red team data? And they want them to provide that to the federal government to ensure, because if LLM or a ChatGPT can pass the Turing test, that's scary. You know, humans sometimes have difficulty passing the Turing test. So I mean, if ChatGPT can pass it, imagine the kind of dangerous things it can do. So I think feeding that information back to the federal government, you know, that executive mandate, I think is pretty cool. So it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. So I think it's anybody's guess where we're going to be. But to Stephen's point, really, as you are creating those policies, what are you using it for, and how are you using it for, and how you are super, super conscious about ethical and the responsible elements of it is fundamental.
You gave me more ideas. I'm sorry. So I think back in April we spent that was the idea alarm. So I think back in April I had the honor and maybe confusion of being able to attend the Responsible AI Leadership meeting with CIFR, which is the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, via the World Economic Forum, right? And so one of the conversations there was around digging into like large corporations have an unfair advantage here, right? In that they have access to infrastructure, they have access to a workforce, and going back to the whole discussion around there's the research phase, there's the squishy stuff in the middle, and then there's the product on the other side. How can we democratize access to the infrastructure, to the data, like just access to resources in general, right? So people mentioned open source, and I'm like, yes, absolutely, right? But we need to go deeper, and I think we as if you're in a large corporation, you have a responsibility to the community and the world, right? Because World Economic Forum, so like Arun mentioned governments, but it's mentioned the U.S. government, but it's we had, I think, Norway's government and Singapore's government in that room. It's a global concern as well, right? So there are lots of things popping up. AI Governance Alliance is yet another one coming out of World Economic Forum, where it's starting to get involved. I think going back to building a generative AI policy, find pockets where this is already happening. We're in an open source conference, and guess what, right? Someone has probably already done it. Don't repeat this work, right? Join a forum where you can contribute to it.
Well, I mean, sorry, we're going to keep going.
We're gonna run through the time.
Yeah, well, I think the good part about that is, just a couple of more things. There is a AI Act that was done in Europe, very similar to the AI Safety Institute. And then there was a Bletchley Declaration that was done again last week, where a whole bunch of countries signed that declaration on how they're going to be committed to responsible, ethical safety of AI. So I think it's very essential because, as Stephen was talking about, the training infrastructure can only be afforded by large companies because it's massive dollar investment. So in that sense, these declarations at the federal government level is fundamentally what's going to make sure that these large companies, including Intel, as a matter of fact, we stay true to the community, to the public, and serve their interests as opposed to our interests.
Yeah, one of the things that we want to talk about also is that we do Gen AI with governments. And it's kind of good, but also very risky because the private sector, it's into what is declared to the government of in Latin America, but especially in Latin America, we're like 14 countries. All of us, we have different interests, and that's a little bit concerning for some of us in the sense that how can we adopt ethically if we're a little bit biased? And that's part of the conversation, to define a framework in which we can work as a region, but also, I used to do it before, but we have a concept that is called tropicalization, and basically it's what is good and how we can convey into a common sense for people to develop strategies, not only in the Gen AI, but in technology per se.
And I think to continue kind of everyone's point here, that it is so vital and amazing that there is collaboration, as you mentioned, around the government, the public sector, as well as the corporations, the enterprises, and everyone actually participating in a dialogue that benefits both sides, because then you can do the development of both of the technology as well as the regulation, hopefully together in an open dialogue, so that we reach the best decisions out there. But I think it's also vital to remember that not just purely, technological enterprises as well as the government or the public sector should be working together. It should also involve third-party communities, foundations that are more focused on open source, for example, such as Linux Foundation and so forth, because I think with that involvement, we can guarantee, hopefully, that we have a good pathway to including open source development into these considerations, because we don't, I think, want to have a situation where only enterprises would be developing large language models. We want to have a strong representation for open source technologies within that space as well, which is absolutely critical, particularly when you're talking about the fairness and the ethical sides of AI, because to have the visibility into how the models are developed and how they actually run, and to all of the details around there, is absolutely crucial. And obviously open source is a great way to get there as well.
So I'm going to blow everyone's mind. Maybe I won't. There is speaking of groups of folks that are involved in kind of defining what this needs to be. If you are interested in working on something, one of the things that you could work on is, what is the definition of open source AI? That actually doesn't exist today, right? And I think I've seen lots of conversations around people talking about open source LLMs. That doesn't exist, because by definition, by the open source definition from the open source initiative, they have not defined it, right? And there are several of us who are part of those conversations right now. So if you're looking for a place to get involved as well, actually defining what it means to be open source AI is important too.
2 points actually. Jose, you brought up a really good point. Ethics is a perspective, right? With 16 countries, how do you define what is ethical? So bringing everybody on the same page is super essential. So I think writing that down in a framework is so essential. And on your point, when you think in terms of open source definition of AI, what does it mean? Open source, open data, open training, open weights. Can I take your LLM and retrain it from ground up because you haven't exposed your data? Can I fine tune it? So what does that mean? And that's the work that is happening in OSI. So really encouraged to engage in the conversation. And I don't know if it's going to be open source AI or open AI. I think that is still, we just released 0.0.3 version a couple of weeks ago. So that's where you want to get engaged and provide your input and provide your feedback. What does it mean? I'm sure you have a bunch of questions.
Oh, absolutely. But no, that's a great discussion. I think that when it comes to figuring things out, like you had said, we've said at the Linux Foundation, the cat is absolutely out of the bag and it's running down the street. And the analogy that I like to make is to cookies. Most folks like cookies. We get the cookie dough ready, we throw it in the oven, and some people like it when it's gooey in the middle. But if you eat it and you don't look at it, you could get sick. Eggs, all those things. And we run that same risk with AI, right? If we just pull it down and start using it and throw it right into production, that can be problematic. So when it comes to defining success, I think that's a really interesting next topic for you. And you kind of all spoke to some of those points. Ethics, the licensing of these things, the reproducibility of the models. There are even some projects like Folding at Home, which allows folks to distribute all of this compute and unfold protein sequences to look for cancer treatments, medicine, all of these other things. So when it comes to open source, the future, and figuring out how we define success in an open source way or in adoption within our organizations, What are your thoughts there?
I think it's I liken the responsible AI components within Cisco to the open source mandate or open source strategies, right? Because one, there's a lot of overlap with people. I had the pleasure of working across 40 plus lawyers, I think, in kind of generating this policy. And understanding who's responsible for what, I think is huge, because you talked about the gooiness of the cookie. There are some of us that like to eat the cookie dough right out of the, yeah, an early adopter, right? So you do need that sense, right? You've got people who they're in roles that can only deal with, like, they may be working in regulated environments. They have roles that can only deal with, like, I need it in black and white. I need it as a policy. I need it ready and baked, right? But we operate kind of in this, I think we're operating in this gooier state where we are supposed to be the standards bearers. We are supposed to be the people who are forming this, right? So, at the very least, who we have involved is, I'm a representative on behalf of strategy and engineering for the company. We have folks that are in our security and trust office. We have folks in our again, lots of legal folks. There's privacy, there are trademarks and copyrights. There's brand strategy, because we get lots of questions of, like, hey, can I use this for marketing content, et cetera, right? So, like, you kind of go down the list, and I think it's really important, because just the same with open source, where, my thing is, like, I run a distributed OSPO, which means I have partners throughout the org, right? That's the only way we can function. We're too small of a team you can't run open source for a company of 80,000 plus, right? It's not, it's all of our responsibility. Same thing with AI. It's all of our responsibilities, which means that sometimes it's no one's responsibility, it feels like, right? Yeah, no, you take care of that, right? It's fine, right? So understanding who is responsible for what the deliverables are, doing the RACI chart of, like, okay, I'm going to talk to this person, they're going to report out at this time, and we're going to come back together in a group of maybe 100 people to figure out what's going on. But, like, getting that responsibility is important.
Yeah, and the question, what does success mean in the context of open source, or what does, in the terms of AI? I think that's a very big question, to be honest. And it depends on what level are you thinking about it. So you can think about it at a societal level. What is success at the societal level when we embark on this essentially whole new era of AI or whatnot? Because, I guess unsuccess maybe might mean in that context of Terminator scenario or something like that. I don't know. There are people who are talking about these as well. But then on a company level, for example, success likely would mean something that, your productivity is going up, for example, with the help of, like, generative AI and so forth. And also you don't lose, for example, company secrets, you don't have copyright issues and so forth, as well as, ethical stuff is handled very well and so forth. But what does it mean in actual concrete terms then on per organization to organization level? Then I guess it means that it is successful AI projects that use, for example, in this context, if it's open source, they use open source practices, they use open source tooling, so that they likely, hopefully, would increase the ethical and the fairness, at least the visibility aspect of the trials and everything, that then leads to those productivity gains, or obviously from purely kind of stakeholder economic perspective, that they add more value to the company's bottom line and so forth. I think that from an internal company perspective would be success. But I think success looks very different than on, for example, an individual developer, or does it add to their productivity, to their happiness every day in their work life, as well as that societal terminator level of failure in that case. So there's a lot of ways to it, and I think we will know exactly on, for example, I think the organizational or company level, which I think it's the most tangible one that we can all most contribute to on a very kind of day-to-day level in our day jobs. We'll know in an X amount of time, because now we're all experimenting with these generative AI, essentially policies with chatbots and so forth. So we'll know in X amount of time on what were the successes, what were the failures as far as the productivity gains and so forth.
Having worked across multiple enterprise companies, like I'm at Intel right now, prior to that I was at Apple, then Amazon, one of the things that scares me is when we start open source washing everything. Oh, this is open source. Is it really open source? Is it source open? So what is that terminology? What do you mean? And we have seen that kind of mentality in a lot of the models that have been announced recently. Oh, this is open source. Is it truly? So I think to me, really that success is sort of, I'm not saying 100% people have to agree, but a general consensus on the definition of what open AI means. So that's sort of the first part of it. The second part of it that I see is we think in terms of crossing the chasm, right? I remember when we used to talk about Kubernetes, that, hey, Kubernetes, like few years ago, Kubernetes has crossed the chasm, where it's adopted as the de facto platform, and majority of the people are using that as the compute layer. It took us a few years for crossing the chasm for Kubernetes. I don't think that's going to be the case here, because AI is a force that everybody is adopting. How quickly we cross the chasm this year, next year, soon, I don't know. I think, but that's something to be seen. And third part, I think what you refer to is, in the immediate term, as these productivity gains are happening across the company, in different sectors, whether it's retail, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's marketing, whether it's churning out content, that's what will build confidence in the people that, oh, this is actually really credible. Like I have a nephew who just sold his company. He spent, 2.5 years on that company, all using AI. He came as a Fortune 30 under 30. He sold his company in 2.5 years using GenAI for productivity gains, 10x productivity gains. How fast? He spun up a company 2.5 years ago, and a couple of months ago, he sold his company already. So I think that's a massive productivity gain that you're seeing. Like, oh, okay, so there's some real value into it. So I think realizing that economic value is going to be essential as we see how these open source gains happen.
Yeah, a little bit. What you say is quite true. Open AI for everyone, I guess for all, but it's not so easy. It's different and it's very subjective depending on who is who and the needs. For us in our company is to apply in Kubernetes with AI, right? We're trying to get it done. We're a company of 50. But for the region is to amplify and speed up the process of open source and cloud native technologies. It can be one. And also for other communities, and there's a lot of people using AI without knowing technology. So that's the biggest concern for people, to what's good and have, again, this framework for establishing what's success. Because success is as subjective as life. What's life? And and we don't want terminators, of course, but if we don't take accountability today in our workplace, in our community, and also in our ecosystem, it's going to be crazy, and we don't want any concerns about that. But to finalize, this is my final thought, what we can do with OpenAI and GenAI basically is empower people to give them solutions with a very fast pace. And that's pretty much what I think and I believe.
It's really interesting to hear all those thoughts, and then I really do like that focus on, we call things open source. Do we mean source open? Is the license friendly to open source? Kind of what are those concerns? And when it comes to using LLMs, many people use it in different ways, right? Writing a poem, figuring out a story, generating code. There's different kinds of inputs and outputs as it pertains to LLMs. And then there's also this concept of, are we training the LLM? Do we have the steps behind making that happen versus the inference and actually calling it, using it? I think that we're seeing so much LLM adoption is because it's far more than just a database, right? It's something that has an intention and a use case. It's a demo app, right? You can actually call it and use it, which is really easy to sell and to show to folks. But it's not that accessible to people, and it's just these big LLM vendors right now. And of course, it's like somebody owning a restaurant, like, no, come on, eat in. Give me some money. We could come in. You could enjoy a great plate of food. But that won't work forever. And I think that folks bringing some kind of sovereignty back to that, being able to run it on their own, train their own, run their own. What are your thoughts around something like the OSI model, where we can frame those different kinds of contexts when it comes to adopting an LLM? Because before you even call an LLM, maybe Cisco or Intel has some kind of policy where, oh, you put a social security number in here, kick it back before it even reaches the LLM.
No, we don't. We do actually. So yeah, I think just to poke at the restaurant analogy too, right? There's a very common, maybe it's not that common, adage of like, if you don't know who the product is, what the product is, like it's you. So I mean, even coming to the restaurant, they're like, we want you to leave reviews so that we can sell this to more people, right? So I think it's messy. I think it's messy to cut it so cleanly as OSI model. I think even the OSI model is messy right now at this point in this, the age of the age of cloud native, right? Where I mean, I think we have, Arun had mentioned kind of crossing the chasm with Kubernetes, and I remember being a field engineer like and doing Kubernetes stuff, and that feels like a decade ago, but it's not, right? So there are some people I think who are building the bridge, to cross the chasm, and there are some people who are like paragliding through, across. So defining exactly like very cleanly what the layers are, I don't think that's like we're gonna maybe eventually as a society we'll get to this lowest common denominator, right? But lowest common denominator is not good enough. I think we've been talking about like how can we do this as a community, like a global community. Lowest common denominator is not good enough. You have to go deeper than that, right? So it becomes very specific to your use case, right? We were talking about Terminator robots. Like, what if your definition of success is building Terminator robots, right? Then you're going in the right direction, right? Then it's more of a matter of like, giving it the right instructions to not terminate, right? Maybe you just want the robots and you don't want the termination aspects of it, right? So again, defining success and walking through each of walking through each of the steps of, I think for the model, it's, Arun had mentioned AI, the model, the data, the weights, right? Everything that if you just have the model, you don't have enough, right, to get the same thing out of the end as someone else. If you don't have access to the infrastructure to do the level of training that Megacorp might have access to, you don't have what you need, right? So I think it's infrastructure access, it's security concerns, it is definitely understanding of the models themselves, having an entire layer of what is the human component, right? I think we talk about that stack, right? And a lot of people go to that layer 8, which is like, what is the user doing, right? And then the unfortunate like PEBCAC, right, problem exists between keyboard and computer, right? So like there is a huge human layer that is so much larger than anything that you could derive from that stack, right?
So I think one thing I wonder is, when we look at OSI in its time was pretty innovative, and it said Open Source Institute, and it gave a definition of open source. But models are way more than source. Just source is just one element of it, right? Data, weights, how is it generated, training, ops, all of that comes along with it. If I get all of that, can I reproduce it? How long will it take for me to reproduce that entire model as it is? So I think that's a critical element to be thought about it. So I think even though OSI is working on a definition, and I had a chat with Stefano, who leads OSI effort, in his view, is not gonna be a straightforward definition that, okay, this is what open source or open AI looks like. He believes that it's gonna be more like a spectrum, where you could possibly define categories, that we are just the open source part of it. For us, it's open source and data part of it. I can tell you where my data is coming from. Like all these llamas and bards and Palm, all these models that are being generated, or GitHub Copilot for that sake, they are all generated in a massive amount of internet trove, some private, some public. So you cannot make all of that accessible, particularly the private data. So you may not be able to generate it. So I think it's gonna be more of a spectrum in that sense, how open you are, and bringing that common language, so that when I say I'm releasing my model and I'm Spectrum 1 and I'm Spectrum 4 or I'm Spectrum 6, so that we all understand and know how open you are, and then I can adopt it. I think that's going to be the key in my opinion.
Like a matrix of knowledge, I guess.
Yeah, matrix or spectrum, it's a common language that we can all, like, for open source, we always say, here are the 4 freedoms of open source. When I mean open source, I understand this is a OSI approved license. So I think that's the kind of language that is fundamentally missing for saying that, okay, I'll release the LLM, and here does it stand in the spectrum.
And there's similar things too, like lead certification and other things that, like, it's somewhat quantitative, qualitative to give a rating.
Exactly, hard data, good data. And in a way, this is a fun fact. I once had an argument at the beginning, like a year ago, with the ChatGPT. She or it or he gave me the reason, and it was pretty much that I started to argue with him about something that he didn't give me the right answer. I said, okay, there's a bridge here, there's a gap, and we have to fulfill it somehow to put it some, again, frameworks and define what's your knowledge and trying to convey into a common ground of what do you know, what can you do, and the most important, what can you solve? And this is like marketing. I'm a marketer, the chief revenue officer. So we as a team, we use it. But one of the things that it's important is how can we use it in the future. So we don't get static prompts or define something that is the new success, or define this knowledge matrix and make it very powerful in the sense that we are excelling in our knowledge, right? So that matrix can be static for what can we say, a month, and then after the month, we know that we're more intelligent and we're working with the AI. At the end, that's the most important thing, that we become, sorry to say this, but more powerful than the machine. Because if we stay static, that's when we don't do innovation. And innovation is the key to success here. We put more interest, more information, more solving issues for specific groups, for a project, and we release it as a prompt or LLM, new LLM, that is going to be proven, and we have like a small seed of success.
I would say we were lucky that the OSI definition worked for us for the last 30 years. I don't think that's going to be the case for OpenAI. And you're right, change is the only constant. So we'll have to keep looking at how powerful, how dangerous, how exciting the technology is, how it is evolving. And it'll take a little bit of time to come up with the right definition of what that means, and that matrix and that spectrum is going to be constantly evolving.
So I think it's going to evolve over time too, even, right? That definition will not be static. I think an interesting data point, you were talking about the one, I love the versioning. I'm like, thank you so much for the versioning being closer to Semver. But the 002 and 003 of the open source like AI definition. So during All Things Open, which happened very recently, I was part of one of the working groups talking about the 5th freedom that they were interested in introducing, which was verify, right? Being able to verify what is the problem, right? Because the system, again, is so mushy, right? Am I expecting you to, even if I have access to the training, even if I have access to the model, I have the capability to stand up exactly what you're standing up, I'm not going to get the same thing out of it, right? So to expect on the top level, like from a standard definition, that we can verify anything. Like our group, like we had 3 or 4 verify groups, and our group shot it down. I wrote on the paper, we're not convinced, right? And I felt better because the next group that went was the group with the lawyers and the researchers in it, and they were like, we are also not convinced. And I'm like, but we do have a lot of work to do, and I think it's so important that you get involved in that conversation, because whether you're doing marketing, whether you're doing security, your voice matters in this, and there's probably something that you're considering that someone else isn't, right? So like, be a part of this conversation right now.
I think that's a big call to action for everybody here today and folks watching, is to get involved. We've published at the Linux Foundation some advice, very general, on generative AI and that use and adoption on that front. but it's not prescriptive, and we're looking for more use cases. We're looking to the community to come up with things saying, hey, this is great, but can you help me define this specific thing? So please, please, please bring those our way. We'd love to have those conversations and get some things figured out. We won't know until we start to ask the question and then really get to deliberate about it. We've gone back and forth talking about training LLMs and generative AI and then the actual productization of everything too. What are some of your thoughts on the balance between those two? Again, Stephen, with what you were saying about ATO and you have engineers get up and then lawyers. How do you figure out that balance? And do you think that there's some more weighting that should be shifted earlier to the process, later to the process? Right now, it seems to be very focused on that productization.
Yeah, so I think there's a lovely, I mean, it's a natural tension when you look at something like, it's tension, but it's meant to be collaborative, right? When you look at the scale between like product and engineering, right? How can we push toward like, okay, we have to do this, or we have to focus on technical debt, or we have to but we have to get this thing to market by this quarter, et cetera, right? So there's that natural tension, and then you peel back the layers, and there's so much more going on, right? So I feel like it depends is the for any sufficiently difficult technical question, it depends. That's the senior engineer answer. But I do think it starts with walking back from that outcome, right? Understanding what you want to get out of the system, and understanding that the needs of the people who are operating over that system are probably different from yours, right? One of the things that freaks me out the most is the fact that this technology is becoming available to folks, and it's hey, we updated our terms of service. By the way, are you excited about using this in your video conferencing software? Cool, you don't have a choice about it now, right? So the way that customer data is potentially getting harvested across some of these solutions that you might be using. Another popular conference that I went to at some point, they were like, we already have 1,800 connectors in all of our products doing AI, and we're like, cool. I thought I just finished negotiations about exactly this thing, right? So trying to figure out who has what and what you're actually trying to build for and what your concerns are, you need everyone in the room to kind of have that conversation.
I think I was on a Zoom call, probably one of the CNCF calls, and all of a sudden, Zoom started acting out that such and such person is sharing. So what's going on? Oh, such and such person is speaking. They left a comment. It's like, what's going on? And my client was not updated, but the functionality was updated. And a couple of days later, there was an AI companion thing at the bottom. It's like, oh, I can actually disable that thing. So it's like all of a sudden, your product behavior is changing without giving control to the user. And everybody in the call is making fun of it. It's like, Arun, what's going on? Like, why are these people talking back to you? I don't know. I have no idea. So I think that, to me, is the scary part. And this is just a Zoom. So we can kill it and maybe start it again and deal with it. But where it starts becoming pervasive across your life, education, your kid's life, your marketing life, you go to Costco and it starts showing up over there. Everything is now AI washing. And then back and forth ping pong between engineering versus product. The premature productization is an evil sometimes. Have you really thought through this? What are the ethical concerns around it? I think that, to me, needs to, as they say, the only way to get fast. I'm a runner, so my analogy is a running analogy. So the only way to get faster is to run slower. So 80% of your run should be slow so that you can actually run 20% fast. So I think we're running far too fast in this. So just holding it back and simmering it and really understanding the implications is going to be really the key here.
I mean, using that example, not the running thing. I don't run unless I'm in danger. But using the kind of video conferencing software, right? Like, you just touched on a consent issue too, right? So like the folks who were on that call, I think we've had it in Kubernetes community, and like if you've ever seen like the was it Fireflies AI or something, will pop up on your call, and it's like, it's collecting notes and it's doing this and it's going to send a summary, and you're like, okay, well, what about the folks who are in Europe, or or what about the fact that this meeting is under Chatham House rules, et cetera, right? So like now it's on the administrator of the platform. Maybe it's a I won't name names for video conferencing platforms, but like, you know, it's like I've got to go click some buttons to ensure that this feature does not roll out across my organization if I am empowered to do that, if I'm not using, say like a free Zoom, right? But what I've done, or what I failed to, like in failing to do that, I've consented for everyone that is on that call that it's okay to collect this data, that it's okay to put it in this model, et cetera, right? And so that is the part that scares me.
I think with these topics, it's very, for me, with these kind of topics, they're so important and we have to consider them very closely. It's been absolute pleasure, and then to kind of see how the European AI Act is being developed, and as well as the Biden's new take on AI and so forth, and the other stuff that was mentioned in the beginning as well, because hopefully some of the discussions there with the regulators and whatnot, and for example, for the European AI Act, it is, at least now on the draft level, it is quite clear on what is allowed and what is not allowed. Obviously, it will go into more detail, and there is some ambiguity that needs to be worked out. But likely, hopefully, all of the consent issues and everything, regulation is not the answer to everything, of course, but some of the concerns here, for example, hopefully will be figured out with time, with a good amount of actual good product practices, as well as regulations, as well as best practices, and all of these things. Because anytime that you have a new technology, and even though generative AI is not technically a new technology, but the adoption is so much more widespread right now than it was a year ago. So in that sense, it's been exposed to so many more people. You will always have some hiccups, and I hope that we can figure them out and not have blatant consent and any of these kind of issues going down the road for sure.
Yeah, like a lot of times, how long do you take to read terms and conditions?
I read all of them thoroughly, right?
To make a double factor.
Lawyers, close your ears.
Yeah, because basically that's that. I mean, you just, okay, click, wrap, fast, and basically it's when you don't read that you have something embedded into your app or your phone. I was in a sales call, and it happened to me with a very known brand of mobiles and computers that I almost lost my sales call because his mobile activated like instantly, and the guy was trying to look for the camera, and he was and the mobile was upside down and was facing something else, and and the thing is that that's concerning because I was not intended to do that. He thought I put something within the call, and I said, shoot, what can I do? And the guy said, but I just clicked to your Teams meeting. It was not the Teams, of course, but it was very difficult for bringing him back in that call to tell him, look, okay, just read the terms and conditions that you just click twice, and off we go. But if we have like a double factor and we read people, and this is one of the biggest issue here, people don't read. And yeah, I'm not a very good reader either, but we create policies, and there's a very nice lawyer, and there's a lot of lawyers in the world that they love writing. And artificial intelligence does a lot of writing, but we need to make it happen that people read, and that imaginary of invisible contract is really, really read. So that's what I think.
Yeah, so so part of the formation of our internal policy was also around the understanding that you are a supervisor, right? The new role that, because I think, naturally, I think a lot of the discourse publicly has been, AI is going to take my job. Oh my God, like what's going on, And it will make jobs that are, I think, make jobs that are easier to do, right? So much more of your job becomes, well, let's go beyond what was easy now, right? The meeting summaries, the content pushes, right? You can get some of that started by using AI. Great, right? Your job now also includes, if you are leveraging AI, you have a responsibility to supervise what it's doing, right? I think one of the, speaking to an engineering manager externally, they're like, wow, well, we're going to introduce malware and security vulnerabilities to oh my God, right? And what I say to that is, what you have told me is that there is no engineering rigor in your process. You mean if you're using a insert code generation tool here, when you tab out and you autocomplete that, your engineer has decided to accept the suggestion. Your engineer has then decided to commit the suggestion. Your engineer has decided to push the suggestion to a place where I can issue a pull request or a merge request, right? Your team has reviewed that, or you did not, your engineer has not written tests around that piece of code that was introduced. Your team, your pre-submits for your code has not said like, hey, hold on, there's a problem here. Your team, who is doing at least one review before this thing merges into your main line, has decided that it's okay. Right, and all of the checks and balances that are supposed to exist in that engineering system have not happened. Like, your concern should not be AI introducing malware or security vulnerabilities into your production systems. It's the fact that there were so many steps before that you allowed to happen. Right. Instead, like AI is not the problem there, right? So if you're using it, be cognizant of what you're using it for. Be a supervisor of that technology, and two, don't let AI replace good process policy standards.
Regarding the kind of job market and AI distribution there and whatnot, I'm going to be a bit cheesy, but I'm giving fair warning. One of my favorite quotes ever is like the historical sense of the candle makers needed to realize that they were not in the business of creating candles, they were in the business of creating light. And you kind of have to take this kind of attitude, in my opinion, to working in life usually. And obviously, these things are not that simple as that, because societal shifts and changes and people's occupations and livelihoods are connected. But I said that I would be a bit cheesy, so that's my cheesy moment for today.
So let me up the ante on cheesiness. I would like a bot, not a Terminator. I would like a bot who can understand when my wife is going to get angry with me and automatically start putting the dishwasher for me. I think that'll make life easy for all of us. And I can imagine for a lot of people as well.
But it depends on the conscience.
I can't handle that. I mean, she doesn't get angry with me enough, but whenever she's about to get angry, he understands, reads her mind, and starts putting the dishwasher automatically.
Yeah, in a way, it depends on your cloud infrastructure and your open source and everything. But one of the things, and that's quite important, and to be not cheesy, but is the diversity and inclusion of everything within artificial intelligence. I do believe that's a fight that you're going to lose all your life, man. I'm divorced.
I don't want to win the fight. I don't want to win the fight at all.
but basically, I do believe that it's important that we take accountability, and that's something that people always says when they do prompts or they do LLMs and anything particular. It was someone else's fault. He's not in the room. No, but suddenly he was sacked out of the company. And no one knows, and it's accountability that we just make supervision a lot, but also be accountable for small like milestones and co-create within a company. Usually it's the legal part. No, yes, everyone wrote the legal part and part of it. But if I don't connect the dots, always, we have issues. And that's pretty much what
I think this is absolutely straight on, because no matter what we do, we are so early in the cycle, failures are inevitable, even later in the cycle for that sake. So failures are going to happen. There are places and times and situations where AI is going to muck with your head or with your situation or with your products or with your customers. How do we all learn from that? Essentially, resilience is what defines us, the processes, the products, the people, everything that we are doing. So as we are getting into that process, My ask really is just like another technology. Far more invasive, far more pervasive. Don't be afraid of it. Adapt it. See how it helps you with the menial tasks. Failures are gonna happen. Bring that as part of your process. Make it completely automated. Get humans out of the loop and let humans do more fun things on top of that. It's not gonna take our jobs. I mean, we've been around, we're gonna stay around, but how do you make effective and productive use of it and build on top of that, do more better fun things?
Document all of this stuff too, right? I think we had mentioned kind of like having these milestones, like being able to try to understand what your outcomes were supposed to be at quarter blah, and being able to walk back and you're like, that didn't happen at all, or this new agreement with this partner changed the entire way that we reason about this, or we acquired a company and that entire reason for us doing this in the first place doesn't exist anymore, right? So being able to like have firm documentation, I think, going into like responsibility, not just from the AI perspective, but transparency is really important. And I think being able to work on open source, we bias towards that transparency, right? So like continuing to do that in your process. If you have the policy, share it with like not just the stakeholders, share it with the product teams, share it with the marketing team, share it with the legal teams everywhere, right? Make sure there is a way for people to provide feedback into that loop so that you're actually considering that as you step through the next iteration of your process, your policy, your product.
And I absolutely love this. This is one of my favorite topics, the importance, the importance of documentation. Amazing. And I think for me now, that I've been kind of running through a lot of conferences and talking about how to do generative AI or MLOps in general with Kubernetes in a scalable and really nice way. And what I love talking to particularly Kubernetes or cloud native audiences about this topic who might not be so deep into AI or MLOps by themselves is I can see that they have a bit of like a, like a lightning moment whenever I say essentially things like, okay, as an oversimplification, MLOps is mostly DevOps with data. And it's a simplification, but we can think about it in the way that when we're dealing with MLOps, AI, any of these like new hype technologies and so forth, let's not forget all the good best practices that we have from any other field, or DevOps, importance of documentation, or good even corporate communications or internal comms policies and so forth. So keeping all of those in mind when we are either creating the technologies or when we are implementing them in our organization. I think it's also very important to remember not to forget the things that we have learned in the past.
Well, unfortunately, we're starting to draw to a close, so I want to end with a thinker for everybody and ask yourselves in the audience, on the stream as well. If you ever see OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, you'll see him carrying a blue backpack with him. And it's, people have asked him, what's, like, cool, but like nice color, but what's inside? The reason he brings that with him is because he has a remote detonator for the OpenAI data centers. If things went awry or wrong, he has the sole ability to blow them up, which is a good safeguard, but also introduces a single point of failure, which us engineers love to debate about endlessly. Yeah. So I want to ask the rest of the panel, in about a minute or so, who can we trust as we're starting to build these things out, make mistakes, and really introspect the space? Heavy question.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Trust no one. I'm joking, but I'm serious. Like trust no one. Again, you need to be able to document this. You need to be able to hold people accountable to what they say they're going to do with regards to these systems. We are in this kind of forming phase about just the definitions of what these things are, right? So you have, again, we have to. Hopefully, we can trust ourselves together. But that means we have to be in spaces where we can be together to form this stuff. But like initially, right now, trust no one. Everyone's trying to sell something. Let's be real.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I'm just going to continue from there. I think trust no one, but then maybe we can say that trust everyone in the way that trust in the collective, agreement, knowledge, hopefully open source and these kind of things, trust in the power of community when people are actually figuring these things out. But yeah, trust no one in the simplest terms. But if enough people feel a certain way or they need their voices to be heard, maybe then trust those type of communities in that way, right?
I would say will is overrated and motivation is fickle, right? I have a motivation to build a good thing. Sure, but are you building it? So in that sense, mechanisms are the only things that work for you. Like once you build the mechanism, so like, yeah, I want to run every day, but I have the motivation to run, but what is my mechanism that allows me to get out of the bed and go for a run every day? So in that sense, really think about a zero trust environment, but then build that collective knowledge of zero trust as Annie's talking about. What is that zero trust environment gonna look like? Am I trusting the model? And not just on my mental knowledge, but on my systems knowledge. Build that system around your tool, your processes, where it's very automated, where it's very documented, very mechanical, and then you can slowly build confidence on top of that.
Arun, if someone built the Terminator bot, I would run every day.
I want that bot for putting dishwasher though.
Terminator run, no, a lot. But yeah, trust no one, but trust no one to stay active and to be creative and to stay innovative. In a way, we always have to trust no one in order to succeed. But one of the things that is ultra important is build up a purpose. Building purposes are going to take you to the next level. So basically it's purpose, but trust no one.
I love that, a cautiously optimistic vigilance, just making sure to be informed and to continue having these conversations. Well, while our conversation closes today, we do not have to stop that conversation in general. We'd love to have more of that with you during this conference this week and beyond that as well. You can find most of us on CNCF.io. Feel free to get a hold of one of us, and happy to connect you with others within the space. But thank you so much, everybody. Great panel.
Thank you.